Good evening and welcome to the Monday, February 13, 2017 Board of Education meeting. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So before we get started with the regular meeting, I think it's appropriate to note that Jason Bowden, the assistant superintendent, is here and will take the operational part of the superintendent's report. Dr. Freeman is in Jordan, the Kingdom of Jordan, on an exchange, and we certainly wish him safe travel and look forward to hearing about his participation in the programs in Jordan. In the meantime, I think it's appropriate to note that Mr. Bowden has figured out the high school start times issue. That is, just make sure it snows. And that way the girls can sleep until 9:30, and everybody's pretty happy in my household anyway. Why don't we just go to item 7 on the agenda, which is student representatives. I know we have a presentation this evening, and I think since we have a little bit larger number of students than typical, maybe we can just turn it to you and let you get back to studying.
So I'll be reporting on Calvin Leet and Guilford Lakes. So for Calvin Leet, since early January, the students have created and practiced gymnastic routines during their PE classes, which I think sounds pretty fun. So in small groups, the students were responsible for choreographing the routines, which included a variety of movements learned in class, and then they prepared a class routine that was choreographed by the teacher, and then this was presented for their parents, their friends, and then eventually in an assembly for the whole student and staff, and it really helped to emphasize some of the key principles of learning for the students, including effort, self-management of learning, and recognition of accomplishment. So sounds pretty cool. And then at Guilford Lakes, Mr. Flanagan's third grade class got together with the morning preschool class, where the third graders read books to the preschoolers and then taught them how to play learning games on their Chromebooks. And then the kindergartners spent time sharing their writing pieces with their parents in class. The fourth grade student leadership team presented about their trip to Sacred Heart University, which the PTO funded, so they presented it to the PTO. And on this trip, the students learned how to use Adobe Spark at a conference, and then the leadership team will be facilitating activities across the school that has to do with what they learned at the conference. And then finally, the PTO for Guilford Lakes brought a robotics assembly to the school.
I'll be reporting on Baldwin Middle School and Adams Middle School. At Baldwin, since the last Board of Ed meeting, the 5th and 6th grade bands had a concert on Monday, January 30th, as well as the orchestra groups held an evening concert on February 1st, and the 5th and 6th grade and select orchestras all performed on February 2nd. At Adams, the students have been involved in a global project along with the social studies unit when they're reading A Long Walk to Water. And that deals with hardships during and following the Sudanese Civil War. And to raise money for this, they hosted a volleyball tournament with 12 teams, and they ended up raising over $400. As well as the National Junior Honor Society had a wacky winter week where students from selected bands and orchestras would come around and play annoying holiday songs, and students could pay $1 for them to change the song. And all funds went to Sarah. And I just want to also mention that both the 6th grade and the 8th grade, as well as the wind ensemble from the high school, all performed in a concert at Adams Middle School, and it was a big success, and it was a lot of fun.
And then reporting from the high school, Sweeney Todd will be coming up in March, so I recommend getting tickets. I hear it's going to be pretty good. And in regards to Valentine's Day, we have a few activities going on. One of the groups made Valentine's cards for seniors that we wrote during lunch. And then tomorrow we will have the option to buy cookies and hot chocolate for Action Against Hunger to raise money for them, and then the NHS is selling carnations, so that's one of their big fundraisers. And then in regards to Day, we got our results in about the surveys, and we've seen a huge increase in areas that we've been focusing on. So I think Dr. Freeman, and I don't know about you, Mr. Bowden, but they'll have a report for you. And then as far as the dress code committee, we met and kind of wrapped everything up, made a good draft that we'll be presenting on February 27th to the committee. And I think Brendan has more on that.
Yeah, I just want to talk about also winter sports are in full swing. I think track just had states, and I heard that things went very well for them. There's another concert coming up this Wednesday with wind ensemble, jazz band, and voices, and that should be a lot of fun. And as well, the dress code committee, we've made the dress code a lot more, or we've created it so that it has a lot more positive outlook on the way the dress code is handled, and we'll be ready to show it to the policy committee this February.
Terrific. Questions? Comments? Okay.
Yeah, I could add, I think Mrs. Cohen was there, I think you were actually there, Mr. Bloss, that the 8th grade, 6th grade wind ensemble concert, which at one point they had all 3 groups play in one enormous piece, which was amazing. And they have a guest conductor, was he from UConn, I think, or
Yeah.
yes. And so he commented that, you know, he's been all over the state and has listened to bands, and he's been working with the students at the schools, and he said that the Guilford music program is one of the best he's seen in the state. So
It was great. Brendan actually
Terrific.
played percussion, right?
Yes,
In the
yes, I did,
concert.
yeah.
I saw you up there. It was wonderful.
thank
you for
you.
that.
And I actually got a question, why wasn't that here?
Yeah.
The answer, there is an answer to
There
that,
is.
because there's not enough room.
Too many
The
people,
stage at the
yeah.
high school is not big enough to hold all of the combined bands, because it was the wind ensemble, the
6th grade,
6th grade
and 8th grade.
and 8th grade, right, it was just too many people, so they were all.
They
on
filled the whole gym
They filled the
at
entire
Adams.
floor of the gym, right. So there were sometimes when, seems like something doesn't make sense, there may be a reason, and that is the answer. Parking is tough, though, that was very difficult, it's the only place you could do it. Okay, so is part of, under student representatives, it also says here capstone presentation, the physics behind running, who's going to introduce that? Is that, not you? Okay, come on up then. Welcome.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to give a brief explanation of what a capstone is, and then I'll get into the specifics of mine. So a capstone is an independent study in which a student, normally a junior or senior, gets to choose their own topic, and then they find an advisor who is a teacher or other employee at the high school, and then they find a mentor who is a person who's an expert in the study that they're trying to research. And throughout this process, they do journal entries to talk about their struggles and all these different aspects going on throughout the presentation, throughout the research, and then they do research on their topic, and then it ends in a presentation, either for first semester in mid-January, full semester, full year, which is by the end of the school year, and then there's a second semester one. So I participated in the first semester capstone. And coming into junior year, it was pretty stressful because you have a lot to think about. You have your SAT scores, your GPA, and just college is sitting over your head and you don't really know where to go with it. So I was also at the same time running with cross country in the summer, and I was looking at all these people and I was wondering how I was trying so hard and running so much but not getting any better. And I was just really confused. So then I began to wonder, like, was it my effort towards it? Was it my, was it my actual, way of running? Like, what was I doing wrong? So and then I was involved in, or enrolling in the AP Physics this year. So then, combining these two ideas, I then thought that maybe it's the physics behind the running. Like, maybe I'm just not really understanding the breakdown, the concepts of every single thing part of running. So this led me to do a capstone on the physics of running. So I'm first going to start by giving a brief explanation of the breakdown of running in the proper form of what running should be. So there's multiple different things that you should do, which is like very difficult to do at the same time while running. So what you should do is you should try to maintain quick, short strides. And this might seem a little strange, but if you're trying to get over a long distance over a short period of time, if you take shorter strides much faster, you get across the area faster than if you take long strides, which take a longer period of time. Also, a major thing to prevent injury is to keeping your knees in line. And we had a girl last year who tore her ACL while skiing, and ACLs are very commonly torn while running, or other ligaments in the knees, because you're putting so much force on your knees and so much stress that it's just causing you to be very hard on them, and if they're very too far over the knee or too far over the foot, you're more likely to tear the ligaments. So you have to make sure your knees are in line with it, or else you're going to end up with injury. The next aspect is pushing up and off. So there's such thing as heel running, and this is one of the many ways that people run, which is also one of the worst ways that you can run. And it's when you're pushing more down instead of on and up. So if you push down, you're causing more force to be put into the ground, and you're causing yourself to do more work. So you have to try to use your toes and more of your center foot part of your foot so you can push up and off and do less work while running. Next is the elbows. And you're trying to keep your elbows at a 90-degree angle and also not let them cross your midline of your body. And the main reason to do this is air resistance, because if you're running, you don't want to cause yourself to cause more air resistance, because again, you're going to be doing more work, and running is a painful sport, so you don't want to do more work than you have to. And then running is a very psychological sport, so if you're running throughout the race and you're just thinking of every single step you're taking and how much farther you have to go, you're not going to get very far. So the idea of having your whole body relaxed is super important. And if your hands aren't relaxed, then your whole body's not relaxed. And then you start wondering about how your feet are hurting and how your shins are hurting and how everything is just hurting, and you don't want to keep going. So you have to just stay relaxed and just keep your mind on the race and the person in front of you. And then the last aspect is your core, because if you don't have a strong core, your spine is most likely going to start curving, and then your lungs aren't going to be able to stay open and allow you to breathe. So you have to keep your core strong so you can get as much air to your body as possible. So next, this is just a brief diagram of a stick figure showing exactly how a slow motion run would look like. So there's the two legs that are stationary, and the blue leg will stay stationary throughout the entire stride, and then the red leg will bend and continue to bend across the body until it's in the position that the blue leg was, and this will continue through multiple strides. And many of us have learned this through the winter warlock from that Christmas movie by putting one foot in front of the other. So now I'm going to start talking about the physics of the running. So there's these main things called forces, which occur on us every single day. So we've got three things: ground reaction force, frictional force, and normal force. So ground reaction force, like it says in its name, is a reaction force. And we learned this from Newton in his third law, that every reaction force has an equal and opposite reaction. So that pretty much means that if you're pushing down at something with, let's say, 10 newtons, it's going to push back at you with a negative 10 newtons. So it's opposite, but it's the same. And this is also, ground reaction force is one of the main forces of running, and it has two components, which are frictional force and normal force. So frictional force helps you from falling flat on your face while running, and that's why many people wear spikes or shoes with a lot of grip, so they are able to stick to the ground better and not fall on their face. So frictional force is allowing them to hold onto the ground, and as you can see in the diagram on the bottom, you can see the heel runner that I spoke of before, and then you can see the toe runner. And the toe runner has the F in front of their foot, but the heel runner has it behind their foot. So they're causing more friction to pretty much cause them to go to a complete stop before taking their next stride. While the person that's on their toes is having the frictional force in front of them, allowing them to continue in the forward motion and allowing them to keep going instead of coming to a complete stop. And lastly, there's normal force, which is the force that is exerted on a normal day object just being stationary, and normal force is mass times gravity. So everyone every day has normal force acting on them, and it acts perpendicular to the surface that it's landed on, and if you have a greater normal force, it means you have a greater frictional force, and that means that they're having to push down and it gives back more friction on them. So next we've got some free body diagrams, which is what we do mostly in physics class. And you've got in the blue picture you see Fn and then like a circle and a bunch of other arrows coming off. So this is the free body diagram of what a runner's body would look like. And you see that the FA is much greater than all the other ones. And that is key for a runner. Because if something else is greater than that, that means that you're not moving forward. So since there was FRES and friction are smaller than FA, you're able to see that the person is moving forward and able to keep going at a faster speed. And this led me to, so I had all this information, all this research completed, but I still really didn't understand why I wasn't that fast. So I then talked to my mentor, who is this amazing professor from the University of New Haven, Dr. Dan Liu, and she lent me all this amazing equipment. So my first simulation that I did with this equipment was a radar gun speed, which allowed me to test the max velocity of our students at the Guilford High School and their average velocity. So I used this radar gun, which might be a little bit scary because it is what the police officers use, so it doesn't pull you over at points, but it was able to test your maximum speed. So I would point it at the kids as they ran towards me, and it would come up with a number. And then I wanted to see what the different abilities of our runners were at high school, so I took kids that weren't on the cross-country teams and all state runners at our high school. And then I also took them with the average speed, in which I had them run across our basketball court, and I measured the amount of time it took them, and then I divided the distance by the time in order to get the average speed. So here is the diagram, or the data in which I collected. And as you can see, student D was the all-state runner, and he had an amazing maximum velocity. He was able to pick up speed very quickly, which is super helpful for him during the startup of the race, trying to get ahead of the pack, and the finish of the race, trying to beat the kid to the finish or to beat the person in front of him. And you can also see that the other kids in the high school weren't that much far off of him, but the amount that he was greater than them is crucial during a race. And next you have the average velocity, which is what I said with the stopwatch. So as you can see, student D, again, was greater than and had a great average velocity, which is what you really want to see in a cross-country runner, because he was able to keep a fast speed for a long period of time. So in being able to do that, he was able to have a quick startup and also continue with a strong speed throughout. And in order to prove that, or to make more of a comparison, I compared all of these runners of Guilford High School to the Olympian Bolt in order to just see really, we think we're really fast, but there's still these people that are amazingly faster than us. So Usain Bolt had a maximum velocity of 27.8, which is crazy to think that our all-state runner is 20, and and Usain Bolt is able to get to 27.8. But to also think about that, he's a sprinter, so he's able to pick up speed very quickly and keep at it for about 100 or 200 meters. But if we asked him to run a mile or 2 miles, he would get kind of tired. So that's why his average velocity isn't super great. He still has a very high average velocity, but it's only about 22, which is great, but there's people that can keep a high average velocity for a long period of time. So next, I went on to a second simulation, in which I used a video analysis through this program called Capstone. And it allowed me to take a video of the students running across, in which I had a ruler stick or a meter stick on the ground, and I used it as a reference point in order to see how fast they were accelerating across the screen and how their position and velocity were changing. So you can see the one on the top was student D from the data from the last slide, and the one on the bottom was just another student from the data. And you can see that in the linear line, there's a little thing called M, and that's the slope. So the slope of student D was about 1.61, and then the slope of the other student was about 0.43. So it was a drastic difference, and the amount of acceleration is very important for a runner because you want to be able to accelerate past someone else or being able to keep going and moving in a forward direction. And you were also able to see that the peaks on the student D was very, very high and very different, where the ones of the other student were fairly small and not as crazy with each other. And then I also did this with a position versus time graph, which helped to show that throughout the video analysis, I had to click on the center of masses every single time that they went across. And to be able to see that through the position versus time graph, they never moved backwards, it proved that their running forward was a positive way. Because if they had dots on that graph that were below or above that center line, that'd be proving that they were their center mass was moving backwards, or they were leaning forward or leaning back on specific times throughout their sprint across the screen. So it was very important to see that both runners were able to have a straight line with a position versus time graph instead of a rather scattered line. So this again led me to do 1/3 simulation, in which I used a force plate, which I connected to my computer, and I had students come and stand on the plate, and when they jumped, it would show the amount of maximum force that they can cause when they hit the ground running. So as you can see in this student's data, once at about 2 seconds, you can see when the normal force shows about 500 newtons. That is when the student stepped onto the force board. And then the graph on the bottom is an exemplar, so you can see exactly what the student was doing at each time. So at about a little bit before 4 seconds, they're crouching down, so they're putting more force on. And then when its force is equal to 0 again at 4 seconds, that is exactly when they are in the air, because there's no force on the ground. So because they're just in the air, you can't have any force on it if you're not there. And then the highest peak is when they're landing again. So the highest amount of force that this student could have put on the ground as they run across the floor is about 1,600 newtons, which is very important to know, because if the 1,600 newtons was less than or even closer equal to the little bit below 1,600 newtons of the crouching, then that would have shown that they had more newtons crouching than they did jumping, and this would then prove that they weren't successful in running. So you want to have a higher max force when you're landing on the board instead of when you're crouching on the board. And then throughout all of these simulations, it really taught me all that I needed to know about the physics of running and how the importance of your forces and keeping the forces in line, and your acceleration and your velocity and max velocity, and how you have to keep everything in line and everything so particular, and not have too much of maximum velocity, because then you'll blow yourself out in the beginning of the race, but not blow yourself out too much or not use enough of your energy, and then you're not really that tired after the race, or putting too much force down and hurting your knees, or doing any of these things that would just cause yourself to not be successful. I was really made clear throughout this physics. And it was also taught me a lot about myself, because I was able to then see what I really understood and what I really want to think about in college. Because going through the graphs and looking at it and looking all the different stuff that I could look at through the graphs, like looking at the normal force or looking at the data and having to analyze it with Usain Bolt, I was really able to see what I was really interested in college, and it made me think about, okay, now maybe I don't want to major in this, or maybe I do want to major in that. So it was a really important thing for me to do, especially in my junior year, so now I have another whole year to think about it and really make my plan solid before I enter into high school. So I'd like to thank you all for listening, and this is the list of all my students and my mentor and advisor who helped me through this process.
Well, that's terrific.
Thank you.
Well, and that's really an outstanding presentation. I think now all juniors have to do capstone projects. Is that right, or all?
It's a voluntary program right now.
Okay.
But it's open to juniors.
Why don't you come up and just explain a little bit about the program?
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole McDonald. I'm the Capstone facilitator for Guilford High School. And Capstone is open to all juniors and seniors. It's an option for a semester course or a full year course. Full year is 120 hours, and a half year is 60 hours. And it's a personal learning experience that allows them to delve a little deeper in curriculum that they may have started in another class. But it's an outstanding program, and it's really grown through the years. When I first started the program, when I came here to take it over, we had about 15 students, and now we have about 50 for this school year. So I'm really impressed with it. And Emma's done an excellent job, and we chose her for our exemplar. So, is there any questions I can answer?
Question?
Can you give us some examples of other projects that are going on now?
Sure, absolutely. So I had one student study cancer a little bit more in depth. They worked at Yale University with some researchers. I had another student that studied rebuilding a truck. I've had some other students study a world language a little bit more in depth, though Mandarin Chinese. So it really could take many different shapes and sizes. It can be anything that they want to study a little bit more deeper.
Can I ask how the 50, is that juniors and seniors?
Juniors and seniors, it's open to.
And how many of them do semester versus year-long? Like,
So I have mostly year-long projects, and we have about 40 of those, and I had about 10 students do semester 1 and semester 2.
okay. Do they get graded on it? Or is it
It's pass-fail right
pass-fail?
now.
And does it work towards the graduation requirements in a certain area or anything, or is it just extra?
At this point, it's just extra for elective, but there is some talk about possibly making it a graduation requirement, maybe in the future, but right now it's elective.
Terrific, terrific. Well, thank you. That's very helpful for us, and it sounds like your students are learning a lot, and so Emma is, you're not running anymore, Emma? Is that what we should take from this? You're doing the physics part of things. Well, terrific, and congratulations again. It was a very effective presentation, and congratulations to you and all your students.
Well, and thank you for allowing the student to present for Capstone and representing them. I appreciate it.
That is kind of why we're here.
That's great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so you guys are free to hang on if you want, or if you want to go study, that's okay too. We know it's been a hectic couple of weeks, so thanks. Let's go back to the agenda. Item 3 on the agenda is the minutes. January 9 regular meeting. Well, why don't we start off with that? Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved?
Second?
Are there corrections, changes?
One correction, call to order, actually, Mr. Bloss called the meeting to order, not me.
That was a holdover from some other month. Yes, exactly. Okay. So with that, any other changes?
Nope.
Okay, with that correction, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. And January 12th, was that a committee meeting or was that a full board meeting?
That was the administrators.
Oh, that's right, meeting with the administrators. Okay, so is there a motion to approve those minutes, January 12th?
So moved.
Second?
Any corrections, changes? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay,
Abstain?
all right.
Likewise.
January 23rd, which was a board meeting for the budget forum and a workshop meeting relating to the budget. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second? Okay, any changes? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And then January 24th, another budget forum. Motion to approve?
So moved?
Second.
Any changes? All in favor?
Aye.
Abstain?
Okay, 2 abstentions. And then January 30th, special meeting, that was to vote on the budget to move forward to the Board of Finance. And is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Any changes? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain?
Okay, Dr. Myers abstains. Okay, item 4 on the agenda, public forum for topics on the board agenda. Anybody want to mention anything? Are you coming forward, Mr. Massening, or just, no, okay. Okay, Dr. Balistraci, item 5,
Yes.
review the expenditures.
Yes, expenditures for the month of January were $4,485,263.77. Expenditures and encumbrances through the end of January were 51.83% of the budget, as compared to 52.06% in the prior year. The total of payments for the warrants, $2,208,021.38. We spoke about these expenditures at length in the Operations Committee. I don't know if anyone has further questions or things they want to bring up at this time.
Anybody? Is that a motion to approve the expenditures in that amount?
It is a motion to approve them.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, any questions, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Hughes?
Okay, Dr. Myers recuses. 6, communications. I know, Dr. Moore, you said in the Operations Committee meeting you've had some communications about the budget. We'll talk about that on the next agenda item, I think, if that's all right. Any other communications? No, okay. So we're up to item 8, and are Dr. Keene and Mr. Bowden both talking, or just Mr. Bowden? And Dr. Keene is here
Just a smile.
with a textbook in front of her, though, so that's fine.
Well, now I know why I'm such a slow runner.
Yeah. Is it elbows or something
no.
else? Friction.
It's a
Must
lot of
be friction.
resistance. Well, I drew the short straw to talk about the governor's budget proposal. And one of the things I'd like to start with is I formulated some notes focused around a couple different sources, one being the recent articles in the Connecticut Mirror, the Hartford Courant, and I actually drew some information from the governor's own budget presentation that he did in front of the General Assembly. What I hope to do tonight is just to provide a brief overview of potential areas that may impact us as we move forward as a district. So if you bear with me, I'll highlight a few items. The governor has proposed a $40.6 billion two-year budget. It seeks $1.5 billion in labor concessions. It shifts $400 million of annual pension costs to municipalities. It seeks to reorganize the financial relationship between state, local governments and their communities, and actually the relationship in some communities with the hospitals that reside in those areas. It includes close to $200 million in tax-related increases to be recognized by a scaling back of tax credits and raising of other taxes and fees. What I feel the key provisions are for us in Guilford are some substantial changes in how the state, or at least the governor, is proposing to how the state funds cities and towns. And again, I'd like to identify 4 of those areas. The first being teacher pensions. Teacher pensions are currently a $1 billion expense. Costs associated with this are projected to grow by 33% over the next 2 fiscal years. And the governor is proposing that municipalities begin to contribute 1/3 of the employer's share of their local teacher pension costs. For Guilford, this would be based on, if it were adopted, Guilford would be having an added cost of about $2.86 million in the first year, which would be 2018, and of roughly $2.95 million in 2019. The second item is the Educational Cost Sharing Grant, the state's largest program for local school aid. This would be adjusted to shift a much larger share of the resources to communities with a lower property tax base and towns that have more student poverty. For Guilford, this would mean a potential reduction of about $2.7 million. The third item is a new special education grant, which would replace the current excess cost grant formulary. This new grant would reimburse the town's special education costs on a sliding scale from anywhere from 0 to 54%, based on a ranking of each town's adjusted equalized net grand list per capita. That's a lot to say. On the governor's proposal, Guilford is projected to receive roughly $1.2 million. The fourth item was something that was embedded in the proposal that Mrs. Trudeau and I discussed today, and that would be the consolidation of various child nutrition programs. And within this, one of those areas, the Healthy Food Initiative would be reduced by 10%, so there'd be a reduction to Guilford as well with that. Under the governor's plan, just 31 out of the Connecticut's 169 cities and towns would see their state aid grow next year. There would also be a cap on school construction bonding, and there were other items within the budget proposal related to municipal accountability and a tiered system, changes to health and human services, healthcare reform, housing, to name a few. What specifically does this mean for us? It's really difficult to say at this point in time. What we do know is the state is facing a series of difficult budgetary challenges that will impact the revenues they receive and the funding they provide for us and other towns. There are many moving parts with this. If all the proposals are approved, Guilford would potentially be facing a $5.5 million cost increase to their annual budget. And we broke down where that was, just as a kind of a quick review. In 2017, our educational grants, if we add up our ECS and our excess cost grant, as well as our adult education reimbursement, that would total approximately $3.9 million. With the $1.2 million in the new proposed special education funding, we would be receiving $1.2 million. That would be a net change for us of a negative $2.6 million. And after you factor in the pension costs, we would be looking at, as I said, approximately the 5.5, just under $5.5 million if it were to go through.
Which is about 10% of our budget.
Yes, a 10% increase to our budget, potentially. As we've talked about this and discussed, the state legislature is very, very early in their budgetary process, so we know that much can change between now and April. But there's obviously a lot at stake here. We're following it very closely. And I know, Mr. Bloss, you have some comments to make regarding that?
Well, and I mean, just a general comment, first of all, and then we can talk a little bit about specifics. But first of all, we are aware, I want to assure the public that we are aware of this proposal, and we are not going to act like it hasn't been made. It has been made. However, historically, this is, I think, Governor Malloy's 6th budget or 7th budget, 4th biennial budget. They always change. They always change in a significant way, and there is no reason to believe that there are 19 votes in the state Senate and 73 votes in the state House for this proposal. It's just as a matter of history. There are always changes to the governor's budget. Having said that, we are going to keep an eye on it. We are going to pay attention. We are going to make sure that that we are continue to be aware of what's happening in Hartford. If the governor's budget happened, it was implemented, there would be consequences in Guilford, and we would not just say, well, okay, too bad. There's nothing we can do about that, and we're going to act like nothing happened. That's not going to happen. But I also think that it is just based on experience that it's highly unlikely that these proposals are going to be implemented. I'll pause for a second and let other people comment. And I should say, by the way, I've invited Senator Kennedy and Representative Scanlon and Representative Candelora to our March meeting, so we'll be able to get a little more. I'm sure they're looking forward to hearing from us, but they've actually been great. All three of them have been great in terms of being aware of what this means for Guilford and Brantford and North Brantford. So I'll just open it up to anybody else who wants to comment on any of these things at the moment.
I just have a question for Mr. Bowden. You mentioned that municipalities will have the right to tax hospitals. Now, we have a branch of Yale New Haven in Guilford.
Already taxed.
It's already taxed.
It's owned by a private corporation and it leases to Yale New Haven. I think that's right, isn't it?
Well, they're changing.
Oh, is that right?
I think Yale's buying it, but they still get to tax the equipment, which is
Okay.
a large amount of the money coming in.
So well, regardless, I mean, I think that's.
I don't think it's a net change.
Yeah.
But-
No, okay.
Yeah, but that's privately held.
I
It's
didn't know that.
It's privately held, and at least today, they rent it to Yale.
Right. I believe they're buying it. I'm not sure when that's happening.
Okay. Other comments? I just think we need to pay attention, but nobody should act as if this is a done deal. It is so far from a done deal that and I'll just pick on the teacher pension proposal for a second. I know the justification for that I've seen in the paper has been, well, teachers are employed by the towns, and we don't subsidize police officers, we don't subsidize firefighters. Yeah, well, there are some pretty significant differences, and that is, first of all, the compensation, the pension rates for teachers are not set by a local board of education. We've never voted on it. That's because it's voted on and enacted by the Connecticut General Assembly. They're the ones who have set the benefits. They're the ones that have determined that it should be a defined benefit plan rather than a defined contribution plan, as we have done on every single one of our bargaining units through the last several years. We have worked really hard to do defined contribution plans, and we've worked really hard to adequately fund our plans. If you believe the Connecticut Mirror, then the state really hasn't funded these plans for 50 years. And, it is a little frustrating when the entities that have been acting responsibly for the last 30, 40, 50 years are being expected to, or at least proposed, that they bail out the group, the entity that was not acting reasonably and responsibly. So I think that in particular is an extraordinarily tough sell in the General Assembly. I'd be shocked if there was anywhere close to majority support for that. But you identified that there are 31 towns that will benefit, or cities and towns that would benefit. I think Joe Sarasula, the chairman of the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents, called this a Robin Hood budget, and there's something to that. And I think, but one of the foundational flaws in it is that it's not as if there already isn't a very substantial investment by the state, indirectly by the towns, like Guilford, in the cities. We already, the amount of, and I'm going to ask actually our General Assembly delegation to get some hard numbers on exactly what these 31 towns are already getting in ECS and excess cost grant, and, by the way, school construction. New Haven spent in the 2000s $1.5 billion of state money on school construction. Well, we don't talk about that very often. But that's a real number, and so I think it's a very hard sell that that the state hasn't invested adequately in the cities, and there just are obviously very substantial systemic problems that the cities are facing. But this proposal doesn't seem to me to be a responsible and a reasonable way to try to address them. But obviously, it may make a big difference in Guilford. It may not. We're going to keep an eye on it. We're going to continue to act. We're going to do what we can to make sure Guilford is treated fairly in the General Assembly. We're going to certainly do that. But we also don't want to act as if this is a proposal that has already been enacted. It hasn't been. It probably won't be. But we'll be prepared for it. We have to be prepared for it, one way or the other.
And Mr. Bloss, I had mentioned at the end that this could very well come down to the last few days of the session, into April. So it's not like
June.
Into June.
Long session this year.
We may not, because of the long session, we may not know for quite some time. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. The Appropriations Committee is supposed to vote out a proposed budget by the end of April. So by the beginning of April, we'll have a much better idea. Theoretically, we'll have a much better idea. But I think that's a question to raise with the delegation next meeting. It puts us in a very hard position. Again, the people that are the towns and the boards of finance and the voters who are trying to act responsibly, to not wait until the last minute, are put in a very awkward position because we don't know exactly what's going to happen. Now, we'll have a better idea by the time ultimately the Board of Finance votes out a budget. We'll have a better idea. By the time of the referendum, we'll have a better idea. But and we're just going to have to be prepared to address any contingency. I think that's the only responsible thing we can do. We are not going to just act. If there's a 10% increase effectively in our budget, we're not going to just say, okay, fine, we're just going to add that to the budget. That's not going to happen. So we will. This is a very frustrating time to be on a local board of education. I'm speaking for myself. I don't know about the rest of you. Probably is. But we act reasonably in terms of our pension funding. We act reasonably in terms of our benefit package. We act reasonably with health benefits. Our bargaining units, our employee groups have been very fair, I think, to us. And yet here we are, talking about a potential 10 or 11% effect on our budget. It's extraordinarily frustrating, but we will also, I think, hopefully use this as an opportunity to convince our delegation that some of these unfunded state mandates that we always chatter about and have a real financial cost on the district. Mr. Bowden raised one in the Operations Committee meeting tonight. There are many others, teacher evaluations under a state rubric that we don't need. We don't want. It costs us money, costs us time. This may be the time for us to be able to convince the General Assembly, you know what? You're not going to support us? Just leave us alone then. And that may be ultimately where we come out. So I want to everybody to keep in mind that if we have things like unfunded state mandates that we would like to get out from under, that now is the time. So let's take the opportunity and really try to focus our delegation on what costs us money that really doesn't help the educational product. So that's all I have to say about the budget. for now. We are presenting to the Board of Finance on Thursday of this week. Then they deliberate, and look, we get it. There's a lot up in the air right now. There's a lot in flux right now. We are going to pay attention. Anything else? Any other?
Well, the thing that struck me about this budget, which I found very strange, is that normally when any entity has a budget deficit that has to be closed, a gap that has to be closed the way the state does, what you normally would do would be to say, all right, we've got to apportion this among all the constituents. But that's not what the governor's plan does. What the governor's plan says is, well, we have to close this gap, but in the process of closing this gap, we're going to pick some winners and some losers. And so some of the winners, which are basically the cities, are going to get more money. The budget's going down, but they're getting more money, and therefore the towns, which are going to pay for this, have a double whammy. Not only are they trying to close the gap, but they're trying to pay for this increase that's going to the cities. This is a very, very unusual technique to close a budget gap. The other comment I'd make is that, to me, this proposal on the teacher pension is just the thin edge of the wedge. I mean, okay, they're talking about we pick up 30% of the cost this year, and that's going to cost us $2.7 million. Well, you know that next year, or the next budget that comes up, well, all right, you've agreed to 30, now how about 50? How about 75? How about you take the whole thing? I mean, that's clearly where they're going. They haven't funded this, and so because they haven't funded it, they decide to go ahead and put it on the towns. I just can't see how this is even remotely fair.
Which is also why it's probably not even remotely possible.
Right. I mean,
You know,
why would anybody vote for this?
There are a few people that would, but there's
Yeah,
probably
well,
far
some
short
of the
a
winners,
majority.
yeah.
You know, and I should say one other thing, just to be fair for a second. On the teacher pension issue, one of the reasons the teacher pension is so underfunded is, as you will recall from a couple of years ago, the GASB rules changed. And that affected our pension, and we had to increase our contribution, which, by the way, we did. It's had a bigger, the change in the GASB accounting rules has had a much bigger impact on the state pension, teacher pension, than it had on ours, because of the size of the pension, really. So partly, and that message hasn't really been out there, that wasn't the state's fault. That was just a change in assumptions, a change in rules. But they were so far out of balance at the time the rules changed that it made them substantially more out of balance. So
Yeah, but they still didn't fund it.
Absolutely. No, they made unrealistic assumptions about what the rate of return on the investments was going to be. They made unrealistic, and listen, some districts gave early retirement, for example, to bargaining units. That has had an impact on the, and that's been one of those things. We haven't really done that in Guilford for many, many years. It's been
For a while.
a long time. But that shifted costs from municipalities onto the state as early retirements went through. We haven't done that, but some have, and there's some towns that has hurt the state in that respect, but we haven't. And so, no, I just think that is an economically and intellectually impossible ask on towns. It's just impossible.
Not gonna happen.
So, I mean, we will.
Stay tuned.
That's right. Stay tuned and pay attention. We know what's going on. We we are working on it. We are going to try to be as responsible as we can. There may be changes in our budget. I just want everybody, both on the board and in the public, needs to understand there may be changes in our budget moving forward. It may be before the Board of Finance. It may be because we just cut our spending ourselves. Even though we have appropriated a certain amount, we may say, look, we're not going to spend it because we have less in ECS or we have less in excess cost grant. We're going to deal with it. We're going to be responsible. We're going to be fair. We are going to be thoughtful, and we are going to try to work as hard as we can to make sure we get treated fairly in the state budget. So, yes, Dr. Keene, we will stay tuned. We will be as upfront as we possibly can be on this.
Mr. Blatz, if I may, a second, there are a few of us who actually saw Representative Scanlon last night at a different event and talked a little bit about this. And my point in bringing it up is just to perhaps state the obvious, which is people who are concerned about this should contact, should write to, should email Senator Kennedy, Representative Scanlon, for those of you in the district, Representative Candelaro. They are open to hearing from us. It's great that they'll be with us at our meeting next month. I believe they visit us on a yearly basis. They are very, very open to our thoughts and feedback, and I think as our representatives appreciate it because then they can vote in a way that really represents their district. So.
Right. No, that's a very good point.
I also think it's fair to say, too, for the general public, that there are many different sites you can go to on the state government site, as well as some of the area newspapers that have relevant data by town for you to look up and to be able to see where those potential reductions may be and in what areas. So just another resource to be informed.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, it is daunting, the fiscal shape of the state, I think, and some of the loss of revenue. And it's a long-term issue with the pensions, but I looked into it a year ago, and just the rate of the defined contribution that our state hasn't built into the contracts is, at the very far end of where other states are, and that is something that can be moved. It's a longer-term solution, but it shifts some of the burden off of, future generations and puts it into, actually putting the money into the accounts. So I think that is something that they really need to look at longer term.
Well, and then a consequence of the proposal, again, I don't want to call it the budget because it's not a budget, it's a proposal, it's a bargaining position, is really all it is. If it were enacted, all it would do is shift, it would either do one of two things. It would force spending cuts on local districts, or it would shift expenses into the property tax, which is already the most aggressive tax that we have.
Right.
So it's just bad policy. It's bad educational policy, it's bad fiscal policy, and we're going to keep working on it. So isn't that enough ranting for the moment? It's very frustrating, but in any event. So I actually asked Mr. Bowden to do our annual update. There's not going to be a vote, so it's not on the agenda. But how is it that we call in Guilford a snow day? Or how is it that we call an early release day? Or how is it we call a late start day? Because it's a tricky issue, obviously, and then Mr. Bowden's first week kind of making the call, what does he get? He gets a couple of the more difficult calls that we've had in the district, and when Dr. Freeman's here, it seems like it always either doesn't snow or we get a blizzard and it's an easy call. Not so much on Friday in particular, right?
Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday.
Yeah. Now, today I thought was pretty easy, frankly.
A little easier today.
Yeah.
So I go from one presentation, from one storm to another. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to kind of quickly review how we make calls in the district. And, first and foremost, our top priority is really the safety and well-being of our students, our parent community, our community in general, and our staff. And, the decision to open or close a school or a district in inclement or hazardous weather is really based on a number of different things, as I've learned in recent days. The process can begin as early as the night before, depending on when the storm is coming in. But most often, we begin about 4 a.m. Looking at a variety of different things. So I'll just highlight a few things for you so you have a better idea what that process is. First, we rely on information on road conditions from the Department of Public Works, the Guilford Police Department, and our Facilities Department. As you know, Guilford, we talked about this a lot and with busing, is a very interesting town topographically. What is happening in the south end of town could be very different than what you see in the northern part of town. So we really give careful consideration to the streets and the hills and the winding roads that we have and take into consideration where we're at. So where you live, if your street looks great and it's clear and you think everything's okay, you may cross over Route 80 and start heading higher into higher elevation, and it could be dangerous or treacherous in the higher elevation areas. So after checking, with a variety of different entities, we obviously consult the weather conditions and the forecast. The amount of snow we have and the amount of ice that may be coming in is certainly part of that decision. We also look at temperature and wind chill factors, especially because we know that now with more cluster stops, we have students walking and waiting for buses outside. We try to cross-reference as best we can a variety of different weather sources, so we're not relying on just one. And as I found in last night's deliberation over what we may face today, I had one source telling me that we were going to get rain along the coast all day and then we'd have no snow, and at the same time I had another source telling me that we were going to get 3 to 5 inches or 2 to 4 inches. So, you have to weigh through a variety of different factors. But we do the same thing, that other shoreline districts do. We kind of compare notes in terms of our resources for weather venues. It's also really important to consider timing of the storm. You don't want to bring children into a school if a storm is only going to intensify later in the day. So really when the storm hits, how much we're going to get are really critical factors. Especially too, and when you're considering early releases. You also have to consider our building conditions. We need to, as I said, to have a safe environment for our students and staff and parents to get to schools. We also have to make sure, like on a day like today, that we have electricity and that the heat is appropriate in there. So there are other critical factors than just the weather. There are internal components that we have to consider. We have to make sure that our parking lots and walkways and driveways are clear and that we have a safe environment, as I said, to enter into the buildings. As part of that process, especially early morning or in the evening hours, if we're calling the night before, we consult with other superintendents along the shoreline. That happens a lot. We talk about what districts are doing. I talked to, for instance, Brantford this morning. Obviously, Mr. Scarice in Madison, Holly Hignum in HK, Marianne O'Donnell in Clinton. So we're all in communication as to what's happening in various towns because they may see something that I might, or Dr. Freeman or Dr. Keene are not seeing in our area. But I want to note with that though that just because one town is canceling, it doesn't necessarily mean that we would. I mean, every town has its own intricacies in regards to roads and conditions. One town may be having breakdowns in their DPW crews. So, it's as much as we consult, it's not an automatic that just because a neighbor is closing or delaying that we would. We make that internal decision ourselves. When you think about who makes that decision, typically it's Dr. Freeman. When Dr. Freeman is not available to make that decision, it's generally me or Dr. Keene. We talk every morning as well, to compare our notes.
Did he have to have that for you?
4 a.m. conversations.
4:15.
But ultimately, it's the superintendent's or the designee's call. We try to get that call done and made at all possible as early as we can, typically between 5 o'clock and 5 5:15 in the morning so that our communications director can get the word out and the phone calls and the emails out and notify the television stations. Unless, again, it's the night before, like we did the other day, where we knew that we weren't going to open because of the conditions, and then we get the information out the evening prior. But I want to go back to kind of where we started with this. I wish this was one thing that could be an exact science, and there are times like today it's a little easier than others, but weather, as we know, is a variability unto itself, and it changes consistently. So we may start in one direction when you begin the process. You may end up in a very different place at the end, depending on where you're at. But we do the best we can, with that.
Okay. Questions, comments?
Just a comment, as the Atlanta Falcons have demonstrated, Monday morning quarterbacking is a favorite pastime of America. All the energy and attempts of making what is not a science into a science as best you can. And of course, there are going to be people critical. That's the nature of the game. But chin up.
Well, and thank you for saying that. As a parent myself, it's humbling to make decisions with your own children and your day-to-day lives. It's even more humbling to make them on behalf of 3,500 students. And believe me, that weighs heavy on my heart and Dr. Keene's heart, and I know Dr. Freeman's heart too. And it's not, as I said, I wish it were, always crystal clear all the time. But certainly that's never far from a decision that we make about what's in the best interest of the students we serve.
And not just the students, but the staff as well. We
And
have
the staff,
hundreds of employees that we're responsible to.
Yep.
And also keeping those hundreds of cars off the roads when they're being cleaned up.
Right.
It's just as important.
I also want to just take a moment, because I think I've become their new best friend in the recent days. Our DPW crews have been outstanding. Mr. Fillion has been a great job keeping me informed about road conditions throughout town. I want to thank the police department for their input and their considerations, over the recent days, and all the various entities that use our buildings. Let's not forget, it's not just a call on school days. It was calls over the weekend for all the rec teams that use our buildings, for the Cub Scouts and other, school dances and other things that were going on. So it's an everyday event, both day and evening, that are impacted by these things. And the entities that I dealt with were very patient and very understanding. And I know to hear that you can't have an event because of a weather consideration after you've planned it for a period of time is a bit disheartening. But the groups I dealt with and talked to were fantastic, and I want to thank them as well.
Terrific. Well, thank you. That's helpful.
Okay.
So anything else from the superintendents, assistant or associate superintendents? Okay. So item 9 is under the board agenda. The 9.1 is to act on 2 personnel items, one of which is a milestone kind of personnel item, and that is Robert Loiseau, the assistant principal at the Adams Middle School. He thinks it's time to retire, Dr. Myers, after 48 years of service to the students of the town of Guilford. I don't know. Should we let him? What do you think? Well, that's outstanding. He's been around for a long time working in this district. Is he the longest serving, Dr. Keene? Do you know? It's got to be close.
I can't tell you if he's the longest, but I would say he is close.
Yeah. All right.
He was a teacher at Guilford Lakes before he became an assistant principal. And I guess he's probably the last of the teachers that taught my boys.
There may be 1 or 2 others there.
Well, so is there a motion that we ratify his resignation for the purpose of retirement effective June 30th?
So moved. With regret.
And with thanks, by the way. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And then ratify the appointment of a new teacher, Gabriel Mortali, language arts at Adams Middle School, 1 year of experience, effective January 25, 2017. There's a motion to ratify that appointment.
So moved. Second.
Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Item 9.2 on the agenda is to receive a textbook recommendation. Is there, Dr. Keene, are you going to present this, or?
I'll start, but I'm going to ask Ralph Rousseau to come to the podium, and he can certainly add to my information. I do have a copy of a textbook that Mr. Rousseau and his committee is recommending for World History 1 and 2. World History 1 is typically a ninth grade course, and World History 2 is typically one semester course in the 10th grade, and the other semester students participate in civics. And so this textbook is for that course that does go over a year and a half. You have a copy of the rationale, and I will let Ralph kind of summarize. They did research 3 different texts. This was as a result of the new social studies curriculum that the board adopted this year. They worked very hard. We do have monies in this year's budget. This is not for next year's budget, so they can purchase them now as soon as or when the board approves. But Ralph, I'll turn it over to you to let you talk a little bit about the benefits of this particular recommendation.
Okay, thank you for having me here to present. Many social studies teachers have been working with dated resources for a number of years now. Our current text is older than the students that they serve. And we're looking at a number of factors that led us to recommend a new book. One of them is technology improvements that are allowing students to use Chromebooks now. We currently don't have a connection between our current text and the electronic version of the text and the Chromebooks that have just been issued to students. And we worked I worked with a great committee this summer and reworking the social studies curriculum under Dr. Keene's direction. And we have a document now that's closely aligned with the state frameworks and the Common Core, Connecticut Core standards. And this book was one of 3 books, and actually a few others that we looked at to see what would serve our students best. What we like about this book is it has electronic resources embedded with a program that is easily accessed through the student Chromebooks. Students will be able to access electronic text through the Chromebooks home and at school. So there will not be a need to have a printed textbook for every student. What we've put together as proposals to have printed texts on hand in the classroom, make them available and as needed for students if they need them. But we have a whole electronic suite of e-text plus other resources, primary source documents, film clips, works of art, et cetera, that go along with the resource here. We like the inquiry nature of the text, how it's organized. There are essential questions that are posed before the reading so that it promotes social studies inquiry, which is the driving force with our new state standards and district curriculum.
Also, I might want to add, even though our textbooks are, the ones that we are using now are older than some of the students, it's only a resource. It is not all that the teachers use in the classroom. They're using current events, they're using primary source documents, because there is no perfect text, but this one is updated. It probably will be used more than the text that we have now, so I think they will be more supportive of teachers. And Ralph did kind of explain to you, they're not even requesting textbooks, only 50 print copies. So those will be classroom versions and 250 e-text copies. So even though with the print, you do get the e-text, but there will be some print available for classwork or for students who really want to use the print version, but the vast majority will be using electronic text with this purchase.
So with the e-text, do you said there are updates?
No,
Not to the text.
when you're
Okay.
buying the e-text, you're
You're
buying,
buying an
it's a
edition.
6-year purchase. Now, that doesn't mean that we're always supplementing, print materials as new things happen, and you have to supplement, but no, they're not going to give you a continuous update, electronically, even though it would be easy, but financially, it wouldn't be good for the publishing company.
Right, I wondered if they provided, I would think at some point this would happen, that they would provide an update for a smaller fee going forward.
Yeah.
Not yet. Maybe
It'd be
someday.
nice, but
Yeah.
you do purchase, a 6-year. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be updates. For example, they have map labs, and there will be new map labs that will be introduced, or other new resources that you purchase for not a lot of money, maybe, just like you would purchase other professional resources that might go along with the book. So there are other kind of supplementary materials that you can buy along the way, and they do continuously add to that pool of options for you. But those are beyond the basic. This is for the basic piece.
I think we should point out for the viewers that the cost of the text is $105, and we're asking for $50, and the cost of the electronic version is $80.46, significantly cheaper. And we're looking for 250 of those.
Is that the right number, 250 of the e-text? Because it says 300 up above, is it?
When you buy the print version,
Oh, you get the
Yeah.
suite
okay,
comes
fine.
with it.
Okay.
So it's a total of 300 e-text, and then with 50 of
Hard copies.
those will have the hardcovers as well.
Okay. Okay. So the way I think our policy reads on this, and I assume this works with you, that now the book will be available at the central office if anybody wants to look at it. It would be a receive item only tonight on our agenda, and then it would be on our March agenda for further consideration. And that's enough, that's okay with you? That gives you enough time?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions, or?
Yeah, can I just ask, this book is to be used for Modern World History 1 and 2. Is that freshman and sophomore, or what?
Yes, it's currently our Modern History 1 is our freshman year program, and Modern History 2 is a continuation. Basically, it's 20th century history. That is the other half of our grade 10 program, which is balanced by civics. So civics is our state-required course. It's a half year that we run from the beginning of sophomore year for semester 1, and then we do this modern world for the second half of grade 10.
And just for some more detail, the first part, according to the curriculum, really goes up through the Cold War, I believe,
Yes.
is where that course ends for freshmen. And then begins with the end of the Cold War and goes through, well, I guess it ends really around the Holocaust, and then picks up at the Cold War in the 10th grade and runs through conflicts in the Middle East and the information age and to the present. So that's kind of, it's totally modern 20th, 21st century history in the 10th grade.
Okay. Anything else, or?
No.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Well, thank you.
Thank
We
you.
will
This
have
is-
this on our March
Yeah.
agenda, and it will be available at central office for anybody who wants to look at it.
Terrific.
And offer any comments. So thank you, Mr. Russo. Item 9.3 is to approve, as recommended by Dr. Freeman, a $5,000 donation from Guilford Sideliners to Guilford High School for the purchase of school sports banners. That's Exhibit 9.3. Is there a motion that we approve that donation?
So moved.
Second? Okay, any questions, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And with our thanks Mr. Bowden or Dr. Keene or both, you can pass that along, please, to Dr. Freeman. Item 9.4 is to act on a proposed capital bonding request. Do you want to lead the discussion on this, since we talked
Sure.
about it in operations?
Yes, I'll be glad to. So this request is part of our overall 10-year capital plan that we've worked on a sort of a rolling basis for several years. Started with the work that was done by ICES Corporation, an outside entity that did a study of our facilities and our needs with our staff. And so the portion for this year that we would like to fund and so we can plan and start working on it, mostly benefits Baldwin Middle School, which is, before this building was completed, Baldwin was our new school. But it's not new, and the systems in the school are original. So we've been in the middle of a major windows project, which is ongoing, and a lot of work on that will be done this summer, and that's already been addressed through bonding. But we need to increase the amount for that project connected with abatement of PCBs that were found in the structural materials that were part of the windows. So there's an additional amount that we would like to propose to cover for that project, and that amount is $632,262. The second piece that relates to Baldwin, which is by far the largest piece of the request that we're making, which is $2,740,889, is electrical upgrades. This is in anticipation of preparing for a great deal of HVAC work that is coming down the pike for Baldwin. And we discussed this at length in the Operations Committee. If we need to go into further detail, we can do that. The remaining two pieces of the request are smaller. One is in the amount of $380,882. This will replenish funds that are going to be used to replace the roof at Lakes. Jones. During the past year, we found it necessary to replace some stadium lighting here at the high school, which came about as a surprise, and it was an emergency and needed to be attended to. So funds were used from approved bonding, which were written in such a way that it was a reasonable use of those funds to complete the stadium lighting project. But now we'd like to go ahead and replenish the funds so we can use them for the roof purpose. And the last item for $209,798 is architectural and engineering work for future projects that we'd like to get a jump on. So the total amount is $3,963,831. So I'd like to make a motion that we approve going ahead with that request for capital and for the related bond funding. Also want to mention that the roof project will be, there will be a state reimbursement available. We expect that to be around 30%. And that this proposal has no effect on the current year, taxes, the mill rate, the operating budget. So what would happen is the projects would be started, they'd continue into the future, and once completed, we would go for debt, which would then be repaid over time, and the debt service payments would go into the budget, not ours, the town side.
Right.
So that's a motion.
I'll second.
And just to clarify or to add on what Ms. Renner said as to the bond impact, there would be no budgetary impact until at the earliest the 2018-19 fiscal year, and that's when some bonds start to drop off. We've actually been very thoughtful, I think, careful about trying to figure out exactly what is coming off and trying to time it in a way that there aren't new items coming on until some things have dropped off, which makes sense. But this comes under the heading of, if we are not going to build any new schools, which I don't think any of us want to do, we have to take care of our existing schools. And Baldwin is original equipment. Basically, all of the interior, all of the mechanicals, windows, electrical, plumbing, everything is original equipment, and it is past its useful life, it's at the end of its useful life. This was the priority under the facilities needs assessment, as you mentioned, that this could not be postponed. So I think that's the reason that the committee has asked us to really is to move this forward to the Board of Finance for consideration by the voters. Right? So a motion's been made and seconded. Is all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you. So I think that ends the board agenda. How about that? See any neutral principles at play as to why we're Done in less than an hour and a half, or not really? No? Okay, fine. Policy committee, anything, Dr. Ballustraci?
We will be meeting in 2 weeks, so we'll have a lot more to talk about at the next meeting.
Just to, it goes with the policy committee, the homework, I don't know if that falls under CIA or policy.
Oh, sure, talk about it, yeah.
But the homework committee, that will be presented to the policy committee, the recommended policy.
Right, right.
Which will then be considered by the policy committee and then go to the full Board of Ed. Gary actually met with some of the leadership. I was unable to make that meeting last week. I know they've discussed that with the district leadership team. Gary, you may have other comments. But just so people are aware that.
No, that's right, thank you. No, that's very important to know.
No, we have a nice policy that we look forward to presenting to our policy committee, and I'm sure there'll be some further insights there on language and be presenting it to the board afterward.
So dress code, homework, anything else?
I'm telling you, we are a busy group, the policy committee.
I guess. Operations committee,
One thing I'll add that we haven't mentioned is lead testing of the water. So we've tested, and that's been in the news quite a bit over the past year. So in case anyone in the community is concerned or wondering about this, we've tested the water, all the water sources in all of our schools, all of our buildings for lead, and found everything to be well under the acceptable, the maximum limits.
that's
So
good,
that-
thank
that
you. Yeah,
works,
that's good,
yeah.
that's helpful.
Yeah.
Curriculum Instruction and Assessment Committee, we did have a discussion about the homework issue, and look forward to hearing from the committee, from the policy committee and your committee about what the alternatives are. So we may be able to have that in place for next school year, huh?
That's the
Yeah,
hope.
there's a-
We have a timeline that we are recommending, but, if it goes through all the proper channels. But we're hoping by May, if the policy is adopted, that we can start working, the district leadership team will start working on the communication part and information sessions for staff and some of the professional learning that will need to also, be supportive of staff to implement the policy. So we're hoping that by the beginning of the school year, we'll be ready to roll.
Great. So it'll probably be on the March or April board
Right, I mean,
agenda.
depending on, we as a Board of Ed, obviously, in the curriculum meeting, were presented with what we expect to be the policy that comes to our committee in 2 weeks. If they present and we feel ready to pass it on to the larger board, it will be a receive in March.
Okay, great. All right, town committee liaison?
The only other thing on CIA, which is somewhat related, I just wanted to make people aware that 2 weeks from now at the workshop meeting, Dr. Jenny Fredericks, who's a national expert in engagement and lives in Guilford, will be doing the workshop. I think we had initially tried to get that on the CIA agenda, but it went to a workshop, which is fine, but just kind of wanted to make the public aware that that is happening. She's, a resource in our district that I think is worth tapping into.
Where is that meeting? Do you know?
Calvin Lee.
Calvin Lee, 7:30, 2 weeks from today,
Correct.
whatever that is, the 27th. Okay, great. Town committee liaisons, anything going on? Town committee liaison-wise? Not really? Okay. Learn, Board of Directors?
We were snowed out.
Snowed out.
Imagine that.
Public questions. Anybody have any questions, comments? No? Okay. So I would just, since we are a little bit early, I'd like to add to the agenda, if I can, the Mrs. Cullen and Dr. Myers and I are on the negotiating committee for the food service workers, and I think it'd be worth a 2-minute executive session on where we are on that. So can we get a motion to add that to the agenda, please?
Sure.
So moved.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so the added agenda item would be executive session update on negotiations with food service workers. All right, anything else? So then, is there a motion to go into executive session?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, then we will go into executive session for that purpose. We will come out of executive session only for the purposes of adjournment, and there will be no further public votes this evening. Thank you, everybody.